Good evening. My name is Mary Scharf, and I am the 33rd District PTA Director of Budget and Finance. Welcome to our Basic Finance Boot Camp. We are so glad that you have joined us for a fun and informative 90 minutes of training. We wanted to share a few housekeeping notes about this Zoom meeting before we get started. This is a Zoom meeting. Our panelists will be speaking, and we ask that all participants please mute yourselves during the presentations. Please ask questions in the chat section, and the panelists will review the questions and answer the questions during and after the presentations. We will be sharing video segments covering the basic portions of the PowerPoint that we shared with you. The other parts of the PowerPoint will serve as reference when you are ready for more exciting information on PTA finance. After each video segment, we will have some polls and other fun activities, and we will answer as many of the submitted questions as possible. As you probably have already noticed, this session will be recorded. One of our goals at 33rd District PTA is to increase our avenues of communication with our members. The finance team's contact information is on slide 2 of the handout, and the 33rd District PTA has a variety of social media accounts, including Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Tonight, our training team is Lisa Uematsu, 33rd District PTA Treasurer, Emi Morimoto, 33rd District Financial Secretary, myself. We also have Flora Farzad, the 33rd District Tax and Government Filings Consultant. And I don't think I've seen Stephanie Dickinson, but she might be here. She is our 33rd District PTA Auditor. And with that, if we're ready to roll, we can probably go ahead and start the receipts and deposits segment. These will be we'll be talking about slides 17 through 21 in your handout.
Handling of receipts. Here's a sample cash verification form from the California State PTA Toolkit. This form is used for any funds collected by your PTA. Some of you might have variations of this form, but to highlight some of the features, here there's a place for the counters to sign, and at least 2 PTA members, one of whom should be an officer or chairman, must count the money received, and people counting money shouldn't be related by blood, marriage, or reside in the same household. Now here, over on this part, it should be co-signed by the person taking custody of the funds. So some PTAs have a financial secretary who might do this. Others who don't have a financial secretary could have the treasurer sign this part. The auditor should not be any one of these signatures. They should not be counting the money because they'll be looking over the books and examining your organization's records at the end of the audit period. So once this cash verification form is completed, give copies to all signers. Sometimes a photocopy machine may not readily be available, so taking a picture with your phone is documentation as well, so that works. Additionally, if the deposit is for membership, the memberships must be reconciled. So here, there's a separate area on the form to indicate the number of memberships collected, and the amount in donations received. So this total here, the grand total, should add up to the grand total of the cash verification form here in this section, grand total. So please always remember to use the cash verification forms. This is how we verify money received by having at least 2 counters and their signatures, and follow the chain of custody of money. So the chain of custody of money, meaning from the time that the money is received and counted and taken to the bank for deposit. So when counting the money, you might also want to consider putting information such as the student's name in the memo of the check, so that if there's a problem with the check, like as if it were to bounce, for example, you have a way to trace or contact the check maker. So coordinating with the event chair or the folks filling out this form would be a good idea so that they could include that information on the checks as well. Here's an example scenario of the situation we might find ourselves in. So your event's over, and it's late and you kind of look around and there's nobody else around besides you, maybe a couple of others besides your husband and your 80-year-old son. So you're thinking, wow, this is great. My husband can sign and he can be the additional signature on the cash verification form. Great, right? No, not a great idea. So why is this not a great idea? So when counting the money, we want to always plan ahead. As mentioned previously, at least 2 PTA members, one of whom should be an officer or a chairman, must count the monies received. The people counting the money shall not be related by blood, marriage, or reside in the same household. If the money can't be deposited immediately or like a night drop isn't available, plan ahead for the safekeeping of your money with the school principal to use the school safe until you're able to deposit in the bank. Never take the money home. Be sure to complete the cash verification form, document the amount being deposited or being left in the school safe, and to have 2 signatures on the form. If you decide to do a night drop at the bank, depending on your community, you might be able to request law enforcement escort. So this slide here is about electronic check deposits. If your bank offers mobile or online banking, you can make such deposits if your deposits are comprised solely of checks. Keep in mind that you'll still need a deposit receipt, whether in the form of email, text message, or mailed paper copy for documentation of the deposit. Be sure to attach that receipt or scanned image or photo to the cash verification form. Also, your bank might have a policy on the maximum number of electronic deposits, so be sure to check with them because you could be assessed fees. And only check signers on the bank account should have access to that electronic deposit feature. So consider ahead of time which of these check signers should have access or will have access to this feature. Making deposits, other information. There should be no commingling of funds. For example, your PTA should not deposit funds into other organization accounts, such as the schools or the school district's account. And also do not deposit funds into a personal account. Be sure to prepare deposit slips, a duplicate, or make a copy. The original goes to the bank and the duplicate goes to the treasurer for their records. Mark checks for deposit only with the PTA account number. Now, what do you do if you get a non-sufficient funds check? Well, you'll want to develop and use a system to identify these checks. So the system could actually include what we discussed previously regarding adding more information such as student names to the check memo line.
All right, thank you for that great video. I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anybody have any questions? Is a cash verification form needed for direct deposit of funds such as Amazon Smile donations? We usually use, in PTEZ, sorry, we usually record those as an adjustment. So we don't really use a cash verification form because you can't really count it.
If you're manually keeping your books, you may want to use the cash verification form and say this is the amount that came in through Square or PayPal if you're doing everything manually.
Okay, well, if that's all the questions for now, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. Yes, there are tests in this training. Just a 1-question poll. Okay, about 2/3 of the way there for a number of participants who are participating in the poll. We'll give it a couple more seconds. All righty, here, I'm going to end the poll. And I'm going to share the results. Okay, so there's only one true answer, and all of these answers got votes. So Mary or Flora, you want to dig into that?
Okay, an auditor cannot count money because, as Emmy said earlier, they audit the books, and so this needs to be a division of labor there. Student council has a fundraiser. That's called commingling of funds. You can only record and put in the bank account money that's for PTA, and the PTA has full control. So you can't, what we call money laundering, putting other organizational monies through the PTA accounts because their tax exempt purpose may be different from ours. And just as a side note, I've seen where a unit has done that, and it's those funds have to be recorded on their income taxes. So it raised their gross revenue so that they had to prepare a 990 EZ, and it cost them $500 over 2 years was $1,000. So there is a price to be paid for that other than just not doing it. Right, PTAs are not allowed to have petty cash funds, but I want to make sure sometimes people confuse petty cash funds with change funds. You are allowed to have a change fund for a carnival event or for spiritware. And if you sell like spiritware on a continuing basis, you may want to set up a standing change fund.
Okay, so Emmy, you want to share that sample cash verification form? Okay, so this is what's wrong with this picture, if anything. So go ahead and if you notice anything or have questions about any of it, go ahead and throw your responses in the chat. Good. Okay, people notice that there's only one counter signing. Good. And that there's a total under the currency, but it's not broken out. There's one more that's a little more subtle. You don't like the unit name? Oh, Allison seems to be on a track here. What about the dates? You can unmute yourself if that's easier.
Much time between the 1st and the 22nd.
Very good. All right. Yay, Allison. Okay, so does anyone have any other questions about deposits, handling of cash, receipts? There's a question in the chat. And I'm just going to say it's not PTA's job to be everybody's bank. So the question is no, unless that fifth grade committee is actually a PTA sponsored event and you have complete control over the money that comes in and any of the activities or whatever that they spend money on has been budgeted, gone through the whole process, approved by your association. So it's possible for a fifth grade committee to be part of PTA, but a lot of times, and this may be what you're asking about, fifth grade committee as a whole different, well, it may even have some of the same people on PTA, but they're sort of independent and they don't go through the PTA procedures.
All right, there's another question. Almost a month to sign. What is a realistic time frame when a cash verification form is completed to have it verified and deposited? Well, we obviously like to get things done, get the money in the bank as quickly as possible. And everybody's
Yeah.
busy, especially if COVID, things are even tougher. But, in the old days, pre-COVID, I would think that, if an event happened, the person taking it to the bank should probably try to get it there within a week as a rule of thumb.
Yes, that's right. Ordinarily, the financial secretary should go once a week at least, because you don't want those deposits sitting in a lockbox, especially if you need to utilize the funds. So, yeah, we want to make that as quick as possible. And the auditor would look at that, because sometimes checks are dated, like a month earlier than even the deposit date. So that's a problem that needs to be improved.
And I guess this is another question related to the fifth grade committee. It just really depends on how your program is set up. If the fifth grade program, fifth grade committee, whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter. If it's under PTA and part of PTA, basically one of the things that PTA does, then it's fine to take their money and deposit it. If it's not reporting to PTA, if it's just a separate committee that's doing their own thing and collecting their own money and not reporting to PTA, then they're on their own and you shouldn't deposit their money for them. And I guess if we have no other questions, if you still have some more questions, you can go ahead and keep putting them in the chat. But if there's no other questions for now, we'll start the next section, which is about expenditures. And those will be covering slides 9 through 15 in the packet that you received. Can we write this check? So when we have to pay bills, we need to know whether we can actually write the check. And the California PTA has actually issued this great flow chart, which I love because I love flow charts. And you just follow around on the outside. And if you actually stay on the outside track, you could write the check. So is the check approved in the budget? And has the expense been authorized by the association? And has a completed payment authorization form with receipts attached been submitted? You do not have to write that. They should be submitting their own payment authorizations. And has the payment authorization been signed by both the president and the secretary? If all these steps are true, then they can write the check. And if any of these other things if there's ever a no, then they have to go fix that before the check can be written. So that's a great tool to know when you can write the check. And this is a very similar, if you're not into flowcharts, if you prefer words, this is kind of the same process of spending money. Has the money been budgeted? Has it been released by the association? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Has it been authorized by the board? Has the payment authorization request for reimbursement been submitted, complete with receipts and invoices and signed? And if so, then you can actually spend the money. Now, once you've passed a budget, that doesn't necessarily mean you can spend the money. The money actually has to be released at release is what we call it, at an association meeting. So if you know you're going to have some expenses coming up, you need to authorize the actual expenditure of it at the association meeting. So for instance, if you have a meeting in September, an association meeting, you should be releasing all your expenses that you're going to incur between September and your next association meeting. And if that's going to be, say, December, then you only need to release what you're going to spend through December. So for instance, if you're budgeted $16 a month for Zoom, that would be almost probably $192 for the year, but you only need to release the 3 months that you're going to be spending: October, November, December, maybe 4, depending on how the timing is. But you only need to release what you're going to spend at that time. So that is releasing of funds. If you're going to spend it all, of course, release it all. So let's go back to writing the check. Payment authorizations must be completed for all expenses. The payment authorization should include the date, the check number, the payee, the amount to be paid, the budget line with the signatures of the president and the secretary. And the receipts must be attached. So all these things must be filled out completely, must add up completely. All the receipts must be there. And it's very important that the president and the secretary both sign. Because the secretary is signing in part so that it is acknowledged that it has been approved and in the minutes. And they're both, the president, of course, needs to know what's going on in the organization, so they should always sign. And everybody on the board is taking responsibility for the payment, not just you or actually even these individuals, but by signing, they're signing for the responsibility. So everything is very important to have complete signatures. When you write the check, you need to have 2 signatures. Usually you check your bylaws to see who can be a check signer. You should never sign a blank check. I know that people busy and working, sometimes you're going to have an expense, but you don't know exactly what it is. So you are tempted to have somebody sign a check so that you can just pay the bill, but it should never be signed a blank check because you don't know what is going to actually be written on that check. So that's a big never do. And never paying cash. This could be very tempting to do too if like you're working a snack bar and someone comes in with a bunch of receipts that they bought the spam or whatever for whatever you're selling. And hey, can I just get reimbursed right now? Because you got all the cash from the day's sales. And that is nothing, you should never do that. You need to keep your expenses clear and have a paper trail so that you know exactly how much that snack bar costs to run. And just keep everything recorded properly. And you should always use a permanent ink pen, such as a Uniball, so that to guard against fraud. And some of these other procedures also guard against fraud because there's been issues where people have gotten a spam email that looks real. And if you go through all these procedures and actually have everybody sign and double check everything, they'll say, hey, no, I didn't actually send that email to you. So that's another reason why you want to make sure everything is properly signed and reviewed by multiple people. So on this slide, we have an example of what should not be done. At a quick glance, perhaps you can't tell what's wrong. But what you should not do is write a check to yourself, basically, and sign and have yourself sign it. There usually in your bylaws, there should be 3 check signers. So if I need a reimbursement for something I've bought, I would have the other 2 people sign it. Not me, Madam President, and my friend Andy. So that's what we should. So that's a rule that we try to follow in PTA is to never sign our own checks. And electronic payments, PTAs should not pay using credit cards and debit cards. It's okay to reimburse people who have used a credit card. So if our friend at the snack bar had paid with her credit card to buy all the snacks for the snack bar, it's okay to write her a check to reimburse her, but the PTA should not be going out with credit cards and buying things. If you can get a deposit-only ATM card from your bank, that's okay, but it should not be an ATM card that allows withdrawals, only deposits. So, and this is very convenient if, late night after the snack bar closes, you can then go quickly make the deposit and not have the money sitting around. So that would be a great thing if possible. But some banks don't have that. So, and electronic payments with bank bill payment services are okay, but it has to be bank bill payment services like either banks and large financial processors. No person-to-person apps. So Venmo is person-to-person, so that's not allowed. But you can do Zelle, you can do PayPal, and Square is allowed. Now, electronic payments still require all the checks and balances. So we have an authorization for payment via electronic, and it's almost like a check. It requires the two signatures, two check signers, so president and treasurer, whoever the check signers are, and must be filled out very much the same way as a check, with a date, who you're paying, what you're paying for, any receipts that you have attached. And so it's basically the same amount of paperwork as writing a check. It's just a different process. And you have to do this form in addition to the payment authorization. So, like I say, it's basically the same amount of paperwork as a check. We just got another question in the chat. Can we accept PACE? I've never actually heard of PACE. They say it's a payment processor through MyPTEZ. I would think if it's through MyPTEZ, but I don't know. I would have to research that one.
Yeah, my PTEZ uses PayPal for their online store. So I have never heard of my PTEZ using PACE.
Then there's possibly a little bit of question still remaining up above. Nancy had asked, can a vice president sign warrant, I suppose meaning the payment authorization form, in place of the president?
No.
Yeah.
The president should sign the payment authorization. And even if it's their own, in that case, I know we say don't sign your own check, but the payment authorization, the president will sign their own. Reimbursement form.
So this is Nancy who is asking about the warrant. So yeah, she does mean that payment authorization form. So she's explaining the specific situation. Nancy, you want to unmute yourself and give a little more detail about why you're unable to meet with the president?
Hi, this is Nancy. I'm sorry. Yeah, sometimes it's just hard for me. Like, I just don't want to keep the person waiting for his or her check. And if I can't meet with the president, it'd be nice if I could meet with our VP to get someone to sign it so that I can send out the checks.
Well, unfortunately, the procedure is the president should sign the check request. And there's reasons, for these procedures. And is there any particular reason that the president is out of town or something like that? Because with COVID, you can email the check request. You don't need the president to be there to sign it. You can email it to them. They can sign it, scan it, and email it back to you. So you don't need original signatures on the check request if that's the problem.
Oh, no, that helps a lot. Then thank you.
You're welcome.
Some more questions. One was about, can we use Cheddar Up? I don't know a lot about Cheddar Up, but I think it's okay. But again, I might have to do a little bit more research on that. I mean, I actually know them because my church started using them recently, so I think they're okay, but I'm not. I think they're like I think they're like PayPal. And it's interesting that our friend Jillian has noted that MyPTEZ has 3 payment processors that they work with, because I've only really seen the PayPal.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can move to the next poll. Okay, Can we write this check? And while we're going through the polls, you can also keep throwing questions up in the chat if you like. Okay, just going to give it a couple more seconds because it looks like most people have answered. Go ahead, end the poll, and share the results. I'm so proud of you guys. So yes, okay, here I'm going to do my usual soapbox thing. People who are treasurers, because they have the checkbook, sometimes they get put on the spot. Hey, can you pay for this? Can PTA pay for that? And it doesn't have to be on you to say yes or no, because of the procedure, everything needs to go through the board and through the association. So if anyone says, oh, hey, can PTA pay for this? Oh, well, according to PTA policy, it needs to be in the budget. It needs to be, presented at to the board. So just know that those procedures and policies are there to protect you. And so that it gives you a way to make PTA policy the bad guy, because, you can't do it because you're following policy. Okay, stopping the poll, sharing the results. Look at you guys, you're so great. Are you sure you're all beginners? Because so yeah, in this case, you might be pressured because, oh, well, I need the money right away, blah, blah, blah. And again, I think you need to make sure that people realize that, oh, they can't get paid instantaneously. Things need to be presented to the board. So good for you guys. Alrighty. Now, I'm going to put this question in the chat instead of a poll, because it's a little bit lengthy. So go ahead and throw any of your thoughts in the chat about this particular situation. I think everyone's bowing to peer pressure and not seeing this for the trick question that it is. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and read this, and then, especially since as people put their answers in, it keeps scrolling away. Okay, so the budget includes a line item for $500 for parent education, and the funds are released at the first association meeting of the year. All well and good, okay. The Parent Education Committee meets and votes unanimously to have Sue Speaker give a presentation and pay her $200. Should Pam President and Sean Secretary sign the payment authorization form? Here's the thing, the Parent Education Committee is not actually the entire board. So that is a thing where once a committee makes their decision, they do need to present it to the board for approval. So there you have it. I had a question directed specifically to me. You want to just go ahead and say it?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so our at the beginning of the year, we had a budget meeting with the budget committee and created a budget. And so we made a recommendation of the budget to our board, specifically to present the budget that we had discussed with the recommendations based on the administrator. During that budget meeting or the board meeting, some of the members that were, or board members that were not in the budget committee wanted changes, wanted to add other things, take off other things, or lessen amounts and whatnot. So in that event, does the budget committee have to like start from square one and like reconvene and go over the budget? And I only asked because we had an association we have an association meeting scheduled, and you know, there's a timeline of things, and then to like try to meet again and redo a budget. I'm like, so I didn't know how to handle that.
Well, the budget committee makes recommendations and prepares an initial budget, because it's very difficult to have so many people in on your initial budget discussions. And so the purpose of the budget committee is to come up with a plan of what they think is a good budget. But they present this to the board, and the board has every right to change it and you know, to make recommendations or whatever. And then you would have it voted upon. If the majority of the board, which is half plus one, agrees to those changes, then that's what the budget is going to be. It's not necessarily what the budget committee says, but it's what's voted upon and approved and recommended to the association by the board.
Okay, so during that meeting, we can make all of those adjustments at that point.
Because
Okay.
they're just a committee and just submitting it to you as a starting point as the board. And so
Okay.
whatever the board agrees on, they will make that recommendation. Again, the board makes no decisions, it makes recommendations to the association. And the association can change it further. I mean, that's possible too.
Okay, so during the association meeting, if there are changes that need to be made, can we do that also on the floor, or do they have to formally like say, I move that we do, does it have to be formal?
Yeah, motions should be made, even at the board. You know, you can make a motion to change things if that's usually what's been done. And then everything is voted upon. But like I said, the board only makes recommendations. They cannot make decisions because it's the association's money. So everything is approved at the association, the final budget, which again can be revised during the year based upon association wishes.
Thank you. That's very clear.
You're welcome.
Okay, have we addressed pretty much everything that's in the chat, Mary?
I think there was questions about payment processors for my PTEZ, and like Mary, I'm only familiar with PayPal, but my PTEZ is constantly changing, especially when they get into the bylaw business and the fundraising business. They're a company, and so if they're using payment processors, they must have been approved by CAPTA, the state PTA, because they don't do anything without CAPTA approval. So if there's something that can be used on my PTEZ, I think that's already been approved by the state, because the state has the contract with my PTEZ.
And there was one more question about they missed the answer to the last survey. And the question was, can it be paid and then ratified by association if it is within the amount allowed? The problem with the third one was that it was just the committee that had approved the amount, and the board or the speaker or the event or whatever, and the board hadn't actually approved it yet. So that was the main issue. As long as once it goes by the board and they say, okay, then sure, it can be paid since it's within budget.
And there's a question about Zelle and Venmo. Venmo is not allowed, but Zelle is. So I'm not sure if there was something in our presentation that was misunderstood. If you want to unmute yourself, that's fine. This is for Patricia. And I'm going to say that Venmo specifically is not allowed because it is a person-to-person transaction, and it's not covered. It's not covered by FDIC insurance, and so there's a lot of lack of accountability that can go on with Venmo.
Yeah, I think the issue is that the money, when it's paid, must go directly to the PTA bank account. It cannot go to any other, account or personal account or anything like that. So there's no middleman. The money has to be set up to go to the PTA bank account.
And I kind of feel like maybe we should do a little research on these various MyPTEZ payment methods, just to kind of understand why they feel compelled to offer 3 different types. And so we'll try and do a little research, and if we find anything shockingly horrible, then we'll be sure and let you know. But for now, I am inclined to believe that since it is my PTEZ and CAPTA is, contracting with them, I would think that they would stick to whatever's acceptable to CAPTA. Alrighty, are we ready to move on?
Yeah, I think we've just about had all the questions, and I think it's time to move on to the next video about reporting. If you have more questions, feel free to stick them in the chat and we'll get to them as quickly as possible.
Okay, so now that you know about deposits and checks, let's talk about recording those transactions and then also making reports. So there are different ways that you can choose to record your transactions. And if we can go on the next screen, there's some examples. So the top 2 pictures are actually if you want to do your ledger by hand, there's a treasurer's book that's available for sale at the 33rd District office, and you can buy it for, I think, $5. And so if you prefer to write down your transactions, then you can use this. And so you can use a set of pages for each month. And then as you write down each transaction, you're also breaking it down into what category or categories it belongs to. Then on the bottom left, there's a screenshot of MyPTEZ. That's an online financial software that's been designed specifically for PTA. So you can go ahead and enter your transactions there. And then as long as you have the subscription, and it is a paid subscription, then you will have access to your information that you input. And then the beauty of it is that you can give access to other people to see that information. So then it's not like if you have a treasurer's book and then only one person has possession of it, and if it gets lost, then you're kind of out of luck. But MyPTEZ, that information will be there online for you. And then if you want to know more information about that, then you can go to myptez.com for the subscription prices, and then it will allow you to do a 45-day free trial just to see if it works for you and your association. And then on the bottom right-hand section, we have an example of an Excel spreadsheet. So you can also put your information on there. And the only thing is you have to make sure that you have a backup just in case if it's on somebody's computer and their computer crashes and the data is gone, then that's a lot of work that someone's going to have to reconstruct. So hopefully each month you're printing out a hard copy. Maybe you're making a backup to a cloud drive or something so that if something happens to the main data entry point, then you still have your information. So we're going to go on to the next slide, which is an example of a financial secretary's report. And so some PTAs will have a financial secretary and a treasurer, and some only have treasurers. So if you're a unit or a council that only has a treasurer, then understand that the financial secretary's duties that we're presenting here also would belong to the treasurer. So the financial secretary's report is going to include the itemized listing of receipts, the itemized list of deposits, and then depending on how your financial secretary's duties are set up at your PTA, possibly an itemized listing of authorizations for payment. And that's if those duties have been assigned to the financial secretary. So if you see on this sample here, then we have the receipts and they're detailed so that anyone that's looking at that can understand where the money came from. Then you may kind of wonder why the list of receipts is basically the same as the list of deposits. And sometimes what might happen is you may have several different events on a given day. Like maybe you'll be collecting memberships and you'll be selling spiritware. And so you might have two different sets of money on that same day, and you might want to deposit that also together. So in that case, then those two different receipts would actually show up on that same deposit. Okay, so this slide number 25 basically just says what I just told you. So we're just going to hop on over to the next slide, which is a sample of a treasurer's report. Okay, so couple things we need to make clear that this treasurer's report is going to include all of your deposits and all checks written during the period. So in this example, it's October 2020. And so all the checks that you wrote during that period are going to be on here, even if they haven't cleared the bank. I'll get into that a little later. And then all of your deposits will be on here. Also, you want to make sure that you're including other transactions that are not specifically checks or transfers or deposits, because if you're lucky enough to have enough money to be making interest, then you want to make sure that you include any interest payments from the bank. If you have Totem, you might be receiving membership payments through Totem. And so make sure that you include those. If you have any bank charges, sometimes your bank will charge you a monthly service fee, or perhaps someone bounced a check to you, and so you incur a fee that way. Those are things you're not going to know about through your check paperwork or your deposit paperwork. So that's something where you need to make sure you're looking at your bank statement to catch all of those types of transactions. So when I was talking about make sure you include all the checks that you wrote during the time period, I've seen a lot of treasurer's reports where basically people are just copying the stuff that shows up on that bank statement, and that's not what you want to do. If you have a check that you wrote during the month of October for $500, for example, and it doesn't clear your bank, you still want to make sure that you include it on your report, because that's $500 that you've committed to spend. And so that affects your bottom line. So for your treasurer's reports, you're going to probably be doing two kinds of treasurer's reports. The treasurer's reports that you present at your board meetings, because they happen every month, then your treasurer's report will cover the previous month. However, for your association meetings, if they also occur every month, then you can still be using monthly reports at your association meetings. But quite often, PTAs have association meetings less frequently. So for example, if you have an association meeting in October, and then you have one in January, at your January association meeting, you want to make sure you're not reporting just what happened in the last month, but actually what happened, any activity that happened since the previous association treasurer's report that happened in October. So for both types of treasurer's reports, you want to make sure that you have a treasurer's report for each bank account. Some PTAs may have a general checking account, they may have a savings account, they may have an e-commerce account for electronic deposits and electronic payments. So each of those, the activity for each of those needs to be included in the treasurer's report. And then for each bank account, you must include the beginning and ending balance for that period that you're reporting on. And then all of those transactions, those checks, those deposits, and those extra transactions like interest income, totem deposits, bank charges. And what you want to make sure you do is that you want to make sure that your board members or your association members can see what it is that you're reporting on. So either distribute copies at the meeting, you can, if you're in person, then you can maybe project it on a screen, or if you're having a Zoom meeting, you can actually just share screen and share it and present it there, as opposed to just not giving them anything to refer to and just rattling off all these numbers. You want them to be able to see what's happening in your bank accounts. And so if there are any questions, then they'll be able to refer specifically to any transactions they have questions about. In addition to sharing that financial information with your board and with your association meeting, then we say that you should provide a copy of your unit treasurer's report to your council so that they can check and make sure that you are being sufficiently transparent with your board and your association. In addition to presenting treasurer's reports at the meetings, and there are some other things that you need to make sure you take care of in presenting information to your board. You want to make sure you present your treasurer's report, and if your board has the financial secretary, the financial secretary's report. Also, you want to present expense authorization or bills to be paid. This is so that you, as a treasurer, are not stuck being the gatekeeper, saying thumbs up, thumbs down to any expense that comes by. You can present it to the board, and you as a board discuss it and decide whether those bills should be paid. So anytime you feel like the pressure is on you to make a decision, just remember that you can go back to the board. That's what PTA procedure is there for, to help all the officers and know that any decisions are team decisions, board decisions. And then make sure you're keeping track of your budget. And if you're able to present a budget versus actuals report, that would be great. But at least keep in mind any budget line items that you're kind of getting close to the limits. In that case, you may need to present a proposal for a budget change to your board to see how they feel about that. And is it a thing of, yes, we should increase this budget line item, or, oh, we should just stop spending those kinds of expenses. Reporting to the association, it's a little bit different. Again, you're presenting your treasurer's report. Then you want to make sure you present a list of checks or payments that have been made since the previous association meeting and present that for ratification. So even though expenses have been approved by the board, ultimately the association gets to see what happens with your financials. So make sure you present that for ratification. You're going to want to make sure that any new activities or programs and any changes to the budget are reported to the association and approved. And then we want to make sure that we release funds. So what that means is that even though at the beginning of the year, the association approved your budget, that is not permission to spend the money. So what you need to do is figure out which line items, what kinds of expenses you're going to need to spend up through your next association meeting. So for example, if we had an association meeting in October and then the next one isn't till January, you want to make sure you release the funds for those expenses that are going to happen up through January. And then again, if you can do a budget to actuals report, ideally we want that to be at least quarterly so that the association can kind of see how you as PTA are doing, then go ahead and present that information to.
Okay, looks like we only had one question so far about submitting directly to the council, or does the president submit? And Flora said it may depend on your council. In my experience, it also may depend on your president of your PTA. Some presidents don't want to deal with sending this stuff and maybe just want to be copied so they know what happened. Others want to do it themselves. So yeah, that's something that you work out between your president, your council, as long as it happens. Let's see, is there any other questions?
Well, maybe we should go ahead with the what's wrong with this treasurer's report exercise. Emmy, you want to toss that up on the screen? Thank you.
So again, put your comments in the chat about things that you find wrong with this report.
And there are no math errors, so don't worry about that.
Okay, so we're finding some of the good problems here, that the income on transaction 124 just says money. No one knows why. So yeah, that should have more detail. There's another good one. What was Pam President paid for? No one knows. Maybe it was her laundry. Check 3068 doesn't specify 3068.
That's Pam President's.
Oh, okay. So it does say who is only who's written to. Yeah, exactly. Yes, this is one of my favorite. Well, someone else had alluded to it up here. Bunch of checks missing or used out of order. But the other issue is that September expense listed in October. So it looks like this is one of those classic treasury reports that we've seen that's wrong, that they are recording things when it cleared the bank instead of when they wrote it. So that's wrong. Let me see. Do we have any other issues that no one's caught?
Well, there's the one that you caught last time that I had forgotten, Mary.
Yes, the report actually, am I muted? The report is actually saying bank statement balance, which is again a clue that they're just copying their bank statement instead of beginning balance on October 1st and then ending balance. It looks, yes, they're definitely using just the bank statement. Now, I personally, if I have online access, love to reconcile it to the bank statement before I actually release it for a treasurer's report, but that's different than this.
And yes, Jenny threw in the chat better terms like
Yes.
available balance or balance on hand.
Yes.
Okay, I think that was all I had put in there. So good job, guys. So are we sure there's no more questions? Because we're like pretty much done with presenting our material.
Will you be going over filing of taxes or anything like that?
That's a great question. We are actually planning to have a mini, I don't know what that means, but maybe it's a little bit shorter, training in October, all about filing the tax filings. So yes, that will be coming.
Just not today, because we wanted to make this very basic, just for the people who are maybe brand new, because if we presented all the material that we presented in June, that's really quite overwhelming. So we wanted to focus on that, but it is in your handout for any reference. So. Okay, well.
I was going to say, if there's no other questions, we also want to note that we will be translating this training into Spanish. I'm not sure when exactly that will be happening, but soon. And thank you for joining us tonight. We hope that you learned some valuable information.
Oh, there's actually another question in the chat.
Oh, is there? Excellent.
There is.
It's a question on how to clear a voided check in my PTEZ. It was voided in June, but still shows up in July and August.
It depends on the default date for a voided check is the current date, unless you change that to the date of the check. So if you have a June check, but you didn't void it until August, it's not going to show up until August as being voided. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so there's a space when you're voiding the check, and say you have the June check and you decide to void it. Say you wanted to void it in July because it was a lost check and you were reissuing it. You have to make sure that in that void window that you specify a July date so that it'll show up on the void will show up on your July report. And I'm hoping that makes sense. It's kind of hard without any visuals.
And there's another question. if an expense from September doesn't hit until October, how do you show that? If you have an expense in September, if you write your checks on September 15th, you record that in the September monthly report. And if it doesn't clear the bank until October, that'll just be a reconciling item on your bank reconciliation. But it should show up in your treasurer's report in September.
And Allison had her hand up at one point and then took it down. Oh, that's a never mind, huh? Okay.
And then there's another question about that voided check. This sounds very strange. You might want to my PTEZ has a help desk and they're very responsive. So they might, it sounds like everything that we've tried to do and tell you in our experiences is not solving your problem. So that is a resort to that you can maybe ask my PTEZ. And like I say, they are pretty good about responding to help tickets. So without being able to, sit down and see your screens, that's the best suggestion I have for you, unfortunately.
Okay, maybe we'll assume that now we're done with questions. You can go back to your concluding remarks.
But anyway, as we were saying, thank you for joining us, and we hope that you've learned something and enjoyed yourself. For more information about PTA finances, you can visit our website at 33rdpta.org, or there's also California State PTA's website. They have a great toolkit at capta.org. And if you have additional questions or ideas for topics that you would like us to provide training on, please email PTA training at 33rdpta.org. And I think that covers it. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Thank you for coming.